The motion sensor triggered at 2:47 a.m. on March 12, 1997, Skinwalker Ranch, Winter Basin, Utah. The security camera mounted on the south fence captured what should have been impossible: a figure moving across the property, not walking, not running, moving in a way that the investigators who reviewed the footage would later describe as biomechanically wrong. The shape was roughly humanoid, but the proportions were off. The limbs too long, the gait too fluid. And then, approximately 30 yards from the camera, it stopped, turned directly toward the lens. And what the camera captured in those next 7 seconds would change everything the research team thought they understood about what was happening on that property. The figure didn't have a face, not in the way faces exist. There was a suggestion of features, a distortion where eyes and mouth might be, but the entire head seemed to shift and blur, as if the camera couldn't properly focus on it. The investigators would later confirm the camera was functioning perfectly. The distortion was in the subject itself. And then it moved again, this time covering the remaining distance to the fence in what appeared to be a single motion, too fast for the frame rate to capture smoothly. The next frame showed it on the other side of the 8-foot barrier without any visible action of climbing or jumping, just instantaneous relocation. And then it was gone. Disappeared into the darkness of the Uinta Basin as if it had never been there at all, except it had been there. The footage existed, and the investigators, who had spent months documenting strange phenomena on the ranch, realized they weren't dealing with hoaxes or misidentification. They were dealing with something that shouldn't exist according to any framework of reality they understood. For decades, Skinwalker Ranch has been called the most paranormal place on Earth. A 500-acre property in northeastern Utah, where witnesses report phenomena that span every category of unexplained occurrence: UFO sightings, cattle mutilations, poltergeist activity, creatures that don't match any known species, electromagnetic anomalies, time distortion, objects appearing and disappearing, voices speaking languages no one present understands. The property has been investigated by private researchers, government agencies, billionaire-funded scientific teams. And every investigation reaches the same conclusion: something is happening here that defies conventional explanation. But the March 1997 incident, the footage of the figure that moved wrong and disappeared through solid barriers, represents something different. It's not just unexplained, it's evidence of something that challenges the basic assumptions about what's possible. And for the researchers who witnessed it, who spent months trying to rationalize what they'd seen, it became the dividing line between skepticism and acceptance, between explaining phenomena within known frameworks and acknowledging that the frameworks themselves might be incomplete. The Navajo people have known about skinwalkers for centuries. But what most people think they know about skinwalkers is filtered through horror movies and internet folklore. The real tradition is darker and more complex. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker, or Ye Naldlushi, which translates roughly to "by means of it, it goes on all fours," is not a monster. It's a person, a witch, someone who has deliberately violated the most sacred taboos of Navajo spirituality, usually through the murder of a close relative to gain supernatural power. That power allows them to transform, to wear the skin of animals and take their form, to move at impossible speeds, to inflict harm through means that defy natural law. This isn't mythology in the sense of ancient stories disconnected from lived experience. This is active belief, practiced and feared in Navajo communities today. Elders don't speak about skinwalkers casually. Many refuse to speak about them at all, believing that discussion invites attention. And that attention, according to tradition, can be lethal. But what if the Navajo understanding of skinwalkers isn't superstition? What if it's practical knowledge passed down through generations about something real? Something that exists in the remote areas of the Southwest, something that has learned to avoid detection. something that appears just frequently enough to maintain the fear that keeps people away from certain territories. The researchers at Skinwalker Ranch, over decades of investigation, began to consider a possibility that scientific training tells you to reject, that the folklore isn't describing hallucinations or misidentified wildlife, but genuine encounters with entities that operate by rules we don't understand. And if that's true, if skinwalkers are real in some form, then what happened at the ranch in March 1997 wasn't just a paranormal event. It was documentation of something humanity has been encountering for thousands of years, but has never successfully captured or classified. Until that night, when the camera was running, and whatever it was decided to show itself. Skinwalker Ranch sits in the Uinta Basin, a region that indigenous peoples have considered spiritually dangerous for centuries. The Ute tribe, whose territory includes the ranch, has stories about the land predating European contact. They described it as a place where the boundary between the physical world and spirit world was thin, where things crossed over that shouldn't, where people who ventured too deep sometimes didn't come back the same. When white settlers arrived in the 19th century, they reported their own encounters, livestock behaving strangely, lights in the sky that predated aircraft, sounds that didn't match any animal known to the region. By the 20th century, the property that would become known as Skinwalker Ranch had developed a reputation among locals. Most avoided it. Those who lived there rarely stayed long, and the few who tried to ranch the land reported losses that didn't make economic sense, cattle disappearing, being found mutilated in ways that suggested neither predation nor disease. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property, intending to run a cattle operation. They were practical people, experienced ranchers, not prone to flights of fancy, but within days of moving in, they experienced phenomena that would define the next 2 years of their lives and make the property famous. UFOs appearing over the property with regularity, sometimes hovering low enough that they could see details of the craft's construction. Cattle being found dead with surgical precision injuries, organs removed, blood drained, no tracks leading to or from the carcasses. Objects moving on their own inside the house, voices speaking from empty rooms, and most disturbing, sightings of creatures. A wolf-like animal that appeared in broad daylight allowed Terry Sherman to shoot it multiple times at close range with a high-powered rifle and walked away seemingly uninjured before vanishing into the brush. Another encounter with what Sherman described as a large humanoid figure that crossed a field moving impossibly fast, covering distance that should have taken minutes in seconds. The Shermans reported these incidents to local authorities, to scientists, to anyone who might provide explanation. Most dismissed their claims, but a few took them seriously. In 1996, Robert Bigelow, a real estate billionaire with a serious interest in paranormal phenomena and UFO research, purchased the property from the Shermans. Bigelow established the National Institute for Discovery Science specifically to study the ranch. He assembled a team of PhD scientists, former law enforcement, military personnel, and technical experts. He installed state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, electromagnetic sensors, cameras covering every angle of the property. The goal was comprehensive documentation and scientific analysis of whatever was happening there. And what they documented over the next decade would challenge everything they thought they knew about reality. The NIDS team began experiencing phenomena almost immediately. Equipment malfunctions that couldn't be explained by technical failure, cameras that worked perfectly everywhere except specific locations on the property where they would blur or shut down, electromagnetic readings that spiked without apparent source, and sightings, multiple team members, often simultaneously, witnessing events that shouldn't occur. Lights that appeared and maneuvered in ways inconsistent with known aircraft. Animals behaving in ways that suggested intelligence and intent beyond normal animal cognition. And the creatures. Descriptions consistent across multiple witnesses. Large canine-like animals that moved bipedally. Humanoid figures that appeared and vanished. Shapes that seemed to shift and change as you watched them. Dr. Colm Kelleher, a biochemist and one of the lead investigators for NIDS, documented an incident in 1997 where he and two colleagues observed a large yellow-orange sphere of light emerge from the ground approximately 20 yards from their position. The sphere was about 3 feet in diameter, emitted no heat despite its brightness, and floated approximately 6 feet off the ground. The team approached to within 10 feet. Kelleher described being able to see the landscape behind the sphere through what appeared to be a semi-transparent center, as if it were a bubble rather than a solid object. The sphere moved away as they approached, maintaining consistent distance, eventually accelerating rapidly and disappearing over a ridge. The entire encounter lasted approximately 15 minutes. When they checked their equipment later, the electromagnetic sensors had recorded massive spikes during the sighting, but none of their cameras, despite being pointed directly at the phenomenon, captured anything more than a faint blur, as if whatever they were witnessing existed partially outside the spectrum of normal light. But it was the March 1997 incident, the figure captured on the fence camera, that fundamentally altered the investigation's approach. Until that point, researchers had been trying to fit observations into existing paradigms. UFOs might be experimental craft. Animal sightings might be misidentified wildlife. Electromagnetic anomalies might be geological. But the footage from that night resisted every conventional explanation. The figure's movement was analyzed frame by experts in biomechanics and digital imaging. The consensus was disturbing. It wasn't CGI, it wasn't a person in a costume, and it wasn't any known animal. The proportions were wrong for human anatomy. Arms too long, legs that bent at angles human legs don't bend. The movement suggested either multiple joints where humans have single joints or a completely different skeletal structure. And the way it passed through the fence, the way it seemed to blur and distort on camera, suggested properties that didn't fit with solid physical matter as we understand it. The research team began consulting with anthropologists specializing in Navajo culture, something they should have done from the beginning. What they learned was disturbing. The descriptions they'd been documenting, the proportions, the movement, the way the creatures appeared and disappeared, matched traditional descriptions of skinwalkers with unsettling accuracy. Navajo consultants, speaking carefully and reluctantly, explained that skinwalkers in tradition don't just look like animals. They take on properties of animals, speed, strength, senses, but they retain human intelligence, human intent, human capacity for malice. And they exist at a boundary point between physical and spiritual reality, which is why they're so difficult to photograph, why they seem to appear and vanish, why normal physical laws don't always apply to them. The consultants also shared something that chilled the researchers. Skinwalkers are attracted to places where the boundary between worlds is thin, places where reality is more flexible. And according to Ute and Navajo tradition, the Uinta Basin is exactly such a place. This created a theoretical framework the scientists struggled with. How do you investigate something that's partially physical and partially something else? How do you document entities that seem to exist simultaneously in observable reality and outside it? The NIDS team began approaching the ranch less as a paranormal location and more as a zone of overlapping realities, a place where phenomena from different frameworks of existence could manifest. This wasn't comfortable for the scientists involved. It required abandoning strict materialist frameworks, but the data left them little choice. They were seeing things, recording things that conventional physics couldn't account for. And the indigenous knowledge, far from being primitive superstition, provided the only coherent explanation for the patterns they were observing. Additional incidents strengthened this uncomfortable conclusion. In 1998, a team member witnessed what he described as a tunnel appearing in mid-air above the property. Not a physical tunnel, but a distortion, an opening through which something else was visible. A landscape that didn't match Utah, possibly didn't match Earth. The tunnel persisted for approximately 40 seconds before collapsing. Multiple team members saw it. Cameras recorded the distortion but couldn't capture clear details of what lay beyond. In 2000, cattle were found mutilated in a pattern that suggested not just killing but ritual. The organs removed were specific: eyes, reproductive organs, sections of hide, and the precision of the cuts suggested surgical tools. But there were no tracks, no blood, no evidence of how the cattle had been accessed or how the perpetrators had left. Ranchers who've dealt with cattle mutilations describe a pattern. These incidents occur in areas with high reports of other anomalous phenomena. They're executed with technology or methods that seem beyond conventional human capability, and they're never solved, as if whoever or whatever is responsible operates with impunity because they're not fully present in our framework of reality. The most disturbing pattern was the intelligence behind the phenomena. This wasn't random. Events at Skinwalker Ranch seemed responsive to the investigators. When cameras were installed in certain areas, activity would shift to uncovered zones. When team members staked out specific locations, phenomena would occur just beyond their position. It was as if whatever they were studying was studying them back, was aware of their presence and methods, was playing with them. Several investigators reported feeling watched constantly while on the property, a sensation of unseen observation that was psychologically exhausting. Some developed health issues, chronic fatigue, strange marks appearing on their bodies, nightmares of being pursued by something that walked on two legs but wasn't human. The psychological toll became significant enough that NIDS implemented rotation schedules to prevent prolonged exposure. Dr. Kelleher would later write that the ranch seemed to exhibit what he called trickster behavior, a term borrowed from folklore and mythology. The phenomena would give just enough evidence to be undeniable, but never enough for definitive proof. It would manifest in ways that suggested intelligence and intention, but would always retain an element of ambiguity. And most disturbing, it seemed to enjoy the confusion it created. Multiple witnesses reported encounters that felt performative, as if the entities involved were demonstrating their presence deliberately, showing what they could do, establishing dominance over territory that humans presume to study. This wasn't wildlife. This wasn't natural phenomena. This was interaction with something that possessed agency, intelligence, and an agenda the researchers couldn't fully discern. And then there was the voice incident. In June 2002, a team member conducting overnight surveillance heard someone speaking in what sounded like perfect English from approximately 20 feet away, asking, "Why are you here?" The team member, a former military police officer not prone to fear, responded verbally, asking who was speaking. The response came in a language he didn't recognize, guttural and harsh. He activated his flashlight and saw nothing. Thermal imaging showed no heat signature, but the voice continued, now seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously, speaking in the unknown language with increasing volume and aggression. The team member retreated to the research trailer and refused to conduct solo overnight observations afterward. Audio equipment captured the interaction, but linguistic experts couldn't identify the language. Some suggested it might be an indigenous language predating European contact. Others thought it sounded artificial, as if a non-human intelligence was mimicking speech without understanding it. The pattern that emerged from years of investigation was clear. Skinwalker Ranch was a location where the normal rules didn't fully apply. where consciousness seemed to affect physical reality, where entities from some other framework of existence could manifest partially or fully, and where human observers were tolerated but not welcomed. The indigenous understanding of skinwalkers as witches who could transform, who could move between worlds, who could cause harm through supernatural means, this wasn't primitive belief. It was accurate description of capabilities that these entities demonstrably possessed. The scientists didn't like admitting this. It violated their training, but the evidence didn't care about their comfort. Something was there, something intelligent, something that could manipulate physical matter, electromagnetic fields, and possibly human consciousness. Something that, according to the traditions of people who'd lived in the region for millennia, was dangerous in ways that science had no framework for understanding. In 2004, NIDS ceased active operations at the ranch, officially due to budget constraints. Unofficially, because the research had reached an impasse. They'd documented extensive phenomena. They'd accumulated data that proved something extraordinary was occurring. But they couldn't explain it within scientific frameworks. They couldn't predict it, they couldn't control it, and the psychological cost on researchers was becoming unsustainable. Bigelow sold the property in 2016 to Adamantium Real Estate, a shell company later revealed to be connected to aerospace entrepreneur Brandon Fugel. Fugel assembled a new research team, installed even more sophisticated equipment, and began a new phase of investigation that continues today. And the phenomena continue. The sightings, the electromagnetic anomalies, the sense of being watched by something that exists just beyond clear observation. But the March 1997 footage remains the most significant evidence, because it's not ambiguous, it's not easily dismissed. It shows something that cannot exist by our understanding of biology, physics, and reality, moving across a property where the impossible happens regularly. And for those who've seen it, for the investigators who've worked at the ranch, it represents proof of something they can't fully articulate, that reality is stranger than we've been taught, that there are forms of existence we don't recognize, that the boundaries we think are fixed are actually permeable, and that in places like Skinwalker Ranch, where those boundaries are thin, where the membrane between worlds wears through, things come across. Things that indigenous peoples have known about for centuries, things that move wrong, that look wrong, that make you feel wrong when you see them. Things that we call skinwalkers because we don't have a better word for entities that are human and not human, physical and not physical, present and absent simultaneously. The revelation isn't that skinwalkers exist. The revelation is that they've always existed. They're documented across indigenous traditions worldwide under different names, but with consistent characteristics. Shapeshifters, boundary walkers, beings that operate at the edge of reality, where our frameworks of understanding break down. The Western scientific tradition dismissed these accounts because they didn't fit materialist paradigms. But the indigenous peoples weren't describing hallucinations or misidentifications. They were describing real encounters with real entities passed down through generations as practical knowledge about what exists in the world and how to survive it. And at Skinwalker Ranch, in a landscape where the boundary is especially thin, where phenomena cluster in ways that suggest that location matters, researchers encountered what indigenous peoples have been warning about for centuries. And it changed them, made skeptics into believers, made scientists question whether science as currently practiced has the tools to understand everything that exists, made them realize that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy, and that some of those things are watching us from just beyond the edge of what we can see, waiting for moments when the boundary thins, when they can cross over and remind us that this world was never entirely ours. The ranch remains active, the phenomena continue, and every few months new footage emerges, new sightings, new incidents that defy explanation. The current research team has captured electromagnetic anomalies, thermal signatures of objects that aren't there, audio recordings of voices speaking unknown languages, and visual documentation of entities that shouldn't exist. And with each incident, the conclusion becomes harder to avoid. Something exists at Skinwalker Ranch that challenges every assumption modern science makes about reality. Something intelligent, something old, something that, according to the traditions of the people who've lived alongside it for millennia, is dangerous in ways we're not equipped to understand, because danger, in this context, isn't physical. It's existential. It's the danger of encountering something that proves your framework for understanding the world is incomplete. That there are more dimensions, more layers, more types of existence than you've accounted for. And that some of those existences don't view humanity as masters of the physical realm, but as temporary occupants of a space that belongs to them. The March 1997 incident changed how investigators see reality because it provided undeniable evidence of something that can't be reconciled with conventional understanding. And once you accept that evidence, once you admit that what you saw was real, everything else shifts. All the folklore becomes potential data. All the indigenous knowledge becomes scientific hypothesis. All the things you were taught couldn't exist become questions worth investigating. The researchers at Skinwalker Ranch crossed a threshold that night. They went from studying anomalies within a fixed reality to acknowledging that reality itself might be more complex, more layered, more strange than the materialist framework allows. And you can't uncross that threshold. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to comfortable certainty once you've encountered the impossible and watched it walk across a field on legs that bend wrong, moving in ways that physics says it shouldn't, passing through barriers that should be solid, and vanishing into darkness that might not be darkness at all, but a space between worlds where things that aren't quite physical wait for opportunities to cross over. And here's the final, unsettling thought. If Skinwalker Ranch is a location where boundaries are thin, where crossing is easier, then what about other locations? How many places exist worldwide where the same phenomena occur, but go unreported because witnesses don't speak, don't have platform, or are dismissed as crazy? How many indigenous traditions describe the same entities under different names, warning about the same dangers, teaching the same avoidance behaviors? And most disturbing, if these entities exist, if they're real in some framework we don't understand, then what do they want? Why do they appear at Skinwalker Ranch? Why do they interact with investigators? Why do they seem to play games, to demonstrate capabilities, to establish presence without revealing fully? Are they studying us the way we're trying to study them? Are they warning us away from territories that aren't ours? Or are they something else entirely, operating by motivations we can't comprehend because we're trying to understand alien intelligence using human frameworks? The footage from March 1997 doesn't answer these questions. It just proves they need to be asked. It proves that the world is stranger than we've admitted, that there are things moving through it that we've relegated to folklore and myth, but that exist nonetheless, in spaces between our categories of real and unreal, physical and spiritual, possible and impossible. And it proves that in certain places, under certain conditions, those things become visible, become documented, become undeniable, and force us to choose. Do we expand our understanding of reality to accommodate what we've seen? Or do we retreat into denial, dismissing evidence because accepting it would require rebuilding everything we think we know? The researchers at Skinwalker Ranch made their choice. They accepted the evidence, and it changed them, made them see the world differently, made them understand that the indigenous peoples were right all along, that skinwalkers are real, and that in the remote areas of the Southwest, in the deep canyons and isolated basins where boundaries thin, they still walk, still watching, still waiting, still there.